National Cabinet will meet tomorrow for crisis talks to get the vaccine rollout back on track, then meet twice weekly. The government will promote mass vaccination clinics, with health officials pushing back against drive-through facilities. Joining me live now to discuss the issue is Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute and Kian Hussey from the Institute of Public Affairs. Ebony, we'll go first to you. Will the Prime Minister bow to pressure and reset a vaccine target?
Well, it's hard to tell, but certainly this Prime Minister seems quite allergic to the idea of setting targets at all, and because the federal government has not met any of the targets that it set early on for the vaccine rollout, I think they've made the political decision that it's much wiser to abandon them altogether. But it will be really hard for the public and indeed the business community to judge how well the rollout is going unless we know more what's happening and there's a bit more transparency. And so the lack of targets, I think, makes that quite difficult. But you know, I think it's quite extraordinary that we find ourselves in this position of having crisis meetings about the vaccine rollout when the Commonwealth Government has had a year to prepare for this. And what's more, very recently was doing almost daily press conferences telling us about how many vaccines were coming into the country and deals we were signing and whatnot. So I think this is a big failure from the Commonwealth Government, but I'm just glad that they've admitted that there is a problem here and have asked the states to join them in solving it as quickly as possible.
And Kian, why has it taken this long to set up mass vaccination clinics, and what can we expect to see come out of these weekly meetings?
Well, I'm not sure that we can expect anything too promising. The key issue here is with the vaccine rollout is that the Australian government, state and federal, have adopted this elimination strategy of coronavirus, which was never viable. It's more costly than the original strategy we went into this with, which was one of suppressing the virus and then managing the virus. I think this is the setbacks we've had with the vaccine and the issues with the different levels of government cooperating are inevitable when the goal is to completely eliminate the virus and keep it out. One key thing that I think we need to keep in mind is that our freedoms that were confiscated off us, our freedoms that were suspended over the past year, have been done so in the name of this elimination strategy, which was never going to work. And while all Australians who want the vaccine should be able to get it in a timely manner, I don't think that those freedoms should be returned on the condition of a vaccine. Australians need to have their freedoms returned to them.
Okay, and Ebony, National's Cabinet will also be discussing the border reopening as well as the vaccinations. Karen Andrews said this morning they do want to get borders open as soon as possible. The PM then said they're in no rush to open borders. Is he walking it back or perhaps managing expectations?
I think probably a bit of both there. It is odd to see him walking those comments back so soon, and particularly because I think those comments that we're not in a rush on the vaccine rollout, all of a sudden we're not in a rush on reopening the borders, you know, that's really alarming, I think. The economic recovery, I think, is at risk unless we can reopen the borders very soon. You know, the tourism industry has been hit really hard. The education sector has been hit really hard. Those sectors are really going to struggle to recover unless we do have a bit of haste. And frankly, I think the question to the Prime Minister is, why aren't we in a rush on the vaccine rollout? Why aren't we in a rush to reopen borders when it's been very clear right from the beginning that those were really key things that the Commonwealth Government prioritised? It spent a lot of time criticising state governments for border closures, and now all of a sudden reopening borders doesn't seem to be as much of a priority. So I think it is expectation management, but I think it's very much linked to the Commonwealth Government's failure when it comes to the vaccination rollout.
Sure. Let's turn to Christine Holgate. And Kian, what did you make of her appearance at this week's Senate inquiry?
Well, I think that this whole Holgate affair, we need to remember that it was Labor who brought this up to win cheap political points, with an implication that there was corruption or that the purchase of these watches didn't pass the pub test and was a misuse of taxpayer funds. And I think it was quite short-sighted of the government to join in the pile-on of Holgate. I think that if we want to talk about misuse of taxpayer funds, there are plenty of other areas we can look at if we want to talk about various different departments wasting taxpayer funds. We can look at the universities, for example, that don't seem to be educating young people very well, but are happy to peddle divisive identity politics. And we can look at the ABC, which receives over $1 billion a year in funding, but which only 32% of Australians think reflects mainstream values, according to an IPA survey. So I think that this is typical of Scott Morrison to jump on this Holgate issue at the beginning to try and shut down any implication of corruption or anything of that nature. But it's been all overblown. Australia Post, under Holgate, returned a dividend to taxpayers, and some key people within the organisation received a bonus for that. That's ordinarily how businesses work, and I think at the end of the day, if we want to remove these issues and this kind of political conflict out of Australia Post, then we have to privatise Australia Post.
So just briefly on that, Ebony, should we be calling out Labor for their should we be calling Labor out for their hypocrisy, given they made the Cartier Watches saga public?
Well, I think the bigger issue of hypocrisy here is if the government is pretending that suddenly it cares about the misuse of taxpayer dollars when it comes to $20,000 worth of prestige watches, where was its outrage when it comes to paying sometimes up to 10 times the market rate for land in the Leppington Triangle land deal for the Western Sydney Airport, when it comes to water buybacks, when it comes to the sports rorts scandal? All of those had many more millions of dollars of taxpayers' money potentially wasted or not necessarily misused, and we didn't see this kind of level of outrage from the government when it came to that. So I think, issues of hypocrisy aside, Christine Holgate's testimony was really powerful, very targeted, sometimes with laser-like precision towards the chair and to the Prime Minister. But I think one of the other issues that came up was this issue of privatisation, the fact that there seems to be some kind of secret plan in place behind the scenes where taxpayers have paid for a report about privatising Australia Post, and that's been hidden from the public. Christina Holgate appears to have been opposed to that plan, and it certainly seems like, as part of the hearings that the Senate has been having, that was certainly an issue between her and the chair, and potentially might have had a role to play in her being removed in the way that she was. So I think really important for the Senate to be holding these hearings to get to the bottom of this, and for Australians to know that there seems to be secret plans in place to privatise Australia Post. That'll be concerning to the many thousands of franchisees that own Australia Post around the country, and I think of particular concern to people in rural and regional Australia who rely on Australia Post to keep them connected, to keep their businesses connected to the rest of the economy, and in some cases to do even basic things like their banking when they might not even have a local bank branch available to them. So really important, I think, to make this a much wider discussion than just the manner in which Christina Holgate was removed from her position.
Definitely some valid points there. Thank you, Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute and Kian Hussey from the Institute of Public Affairs. Thank you both very much for your time. From the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.